Can you describe what the design system team looks like?
Yeah, so we're about 55 in our design system team. Yeah, which is pretty big. But we have 600 product designers and we have thousands of front engineers. So we're at a pretty big scale. It changes all the time because people leave, people come, the organization. But it's mainly split into two main teams. One is the kind of focusing on the foundations. So that's icons, color, type, all that kind of stuff. The other focuses on like the maker experience, so like tooling, Figma libraries, plugins, education, advocacy. And then the third team focuses on purely accessibility. So we used to have a design system accessibility team and a central accessibility team, but now they are one team because we feel like accessibility should come from our components. I think we have over 1 million customers or users for our products. We have about anyone that doesn't know about Atlassian, Jira, Confluence, Trello, those are some of our products. So used by quite a lot of customers. I think we have about 20 products. So our scale is quite big. Luckily, they're all within one brand. We're not a multi-brand organization. It is under the Atlassian umbrella. So one system kind of powers all of them. And that one system is powered by our team. So we have one principal designer. I'm one of 4 lead designers. And then we have a bunch of seniors and then a couple of juniors. And then we have each one of those teams has a squad. So they have a design manager, an engineering manager, and then we only have one product manager for the whole design system. So it's fairly light on management, quite heavy on IC. At the moment, believe it or not, we're very under-resourced for what is required of us. So we actually have 10 secondment roles out to the organization to bring 10 more people in temporarily to help us with the work that we have. Because of the scale we're at and with the center of a lot of big shifts visually or in these product decisions, that we really have to kind of stay ahead of where the business needs us to be. So we ideally would be around 65 center people.
Can you outline at a high level how the Atlassian design system is structured in Figma?
Yeah, the way we structure it in Figma, one of the main principles that we have, which I'm interested to get everyone's thoughts here, which is code and design parity. Now, Figma as a tool is trying to move towards that with Code Connect and props and everything, but at our scale, we really try and make sure our design system matches what's in production or what's in code, even to like the naming of our props, like their camel case in code, we literally try to match them one to one. The way it's broken down into with our design system in Figma specifically, I'll just share my screen. You've probably all seen a version of this. Is we have design tokens and foundations. So this includes what we call like our building blocks, our compositions. So this includes our typography variables, our color variables, our spacing variables, everything that you need to compose your own UI is within, and you feel free to take screenshots. This is all kind of public information. So it contains all of our colors, all of our spacing, all of our typography, and everything like that. And this is what we call our foundation level layer. This is our building blocks. And this is what we want everyone to use in our organization. No one should be deviating from this. Every type, every color, every spacing needs to be from the design system. So everything can look and feel Atlassian. You shouldn't be creating your own colors. We had an issue a while back, which is called Gradient Gate, where people started creating gradients for things like AI, and it wasn't in the system, and it was an issue, and now it's coming back. That was probably the best example of when some people maybe want to deviate and they don't want to wait for the design system to solve it. But we one of our opinionated metrics is that we actually really want to push for 95%, right? It's really hard to push for 100% design system adoption, but for us, foundationally, we want 95% of your colors, your spacing, your icons, your typography to be using our design system. And that's a really hard rule of thumb that we push. And that's the baseline. We have primitives and stuff, which is more of an engineering thing, which is the underlying layer of a lot of stuff. But then we have our foundations. Those are your atoms, if you want to follow Brad Frost's kind of model. And then we have our components. And our components are the extra building blocks, right? The more opinionated, interactive layer. And we have a core set that ADS provides you, but probably around 50%, 60%, whatever, depends on your product, is going to be custom to you. And we don't mind that, right? If you want to make custom components, you probably shouldn't be rebuilding a button, but we do have some primitives where if you do need to rebuild some button-like experience, like an accordion, where you click something, we have what we call a pressable primitive, which is an unstyled button, but it has some interactivity built in kind of stuff. This is all on Atlassian.design our docs if you're interested. But we have a bunch of these components, and these are available to you. We recommend you try and use them as much as possible. But we know that in some case, you need more contextual, more opinionated stuff for your product, your team, and you can create your own components. But anything you create needs to be 95% color, spacing, type, and icon. Behind the scenes, foundationally, it's still the design system.
Why does Atlassian have component-specific color variables for inputs, but not for other components?
Yeah, good question. Mistake, I would say. Probably don't need that. There's a big push at the moment that we have too many design tokens, and we need to kind of relook at our tokens, basically. It is strange that we have input, we have warning, and we have link, but those are and link is weird because link can be an icon or a text token. And it's like, why is link special? So we know there's some discrepancies. And, as I said before, you're going to make mistakes, right? You're trying to do your best. You have a limited amount of time to create a system that makes sense for everyone. But then hindsight's a beautiful thing. So now we know what we know. There are some opportunities, I think, for us to relook at our design tokens. I think we have about 370 color tokens alone or something. Way too much for our designers to understand. So one of the things we're trying to pitch is reduce our token set into a core amount of tokens. That 20% of our tokens are going to be used 80% of the time, right? Reduce our token set to the core tokens and then have this extra set for charts and data visualization and stuff, the icon accents when you need to kind of go away from your day-to-day. And then part of that might be looking at foreground and background. So we may not need the input token. So yeah, all that to say, it was something that we probably did as a political thing just to ship to keep people happy, but it's probably something that we wouldn't recommend, just having these snowflakes. But you're always going to have snowflakes.
I'm intrigued by this idea of having a core set of foundations that you would have in its own file and then share with all design files, and then maybe a separate file with all the colors for charts. And you can choose to add that to your file or not. Is that kind of how that would look?
Yeah, so permissions is like a big thing. We have 140 Figma libraries, various amounts of ness in them. We have around 140 libraries that people are referencing. So a big one of our problems is if you're in a Figma team or you're in a workspace, making sure that you don't have all of those libraries turned on miraculously. So a big thing that we're trying to push is having the right libraries available to you in the team that you're in, right? If you're in the data visualization team, you probably need the chart tokens to be on every time you create a new file. And we should set up our workspaces to handle that. But if I'm in a team that I'm never going to be working in data viz, I shouldn't need to see those chart tokens. So we need to figure out a way to, as you said, Molly, separate some of the things that cohorts of tokens that make sense and only make them available to the teams that need them, but still be visible enough where if people do want to explore with them, they can. It's just it's not clouding their main set of tokens that they need day to day. So it's probably more contextual offerings, basically, like a core set and all these subsets that contextually are required for different teams.
That reminds me of, I think it was Ethan Curtis or someone who used the analogy that I always refer to as like an expansion packs for card games where you have the base set and then you can always like add in the little expansion packs that you need to play like a slightly different version of the game. You can have a little expansion pack for charts and expansion pack for,
I love that.
I don't know, whatever else. Is the idea with the patterns for the designers to keep them intact as instances or to like detach them and then use all the bits and pieces inside?
Yeah, when I first started, I wanted nothing to be detached, and then I realized it's just the reality. Until Figma releases dynamic slots, where you can kind of drag something into an instance and it'll replace, then I'm pro detachment really. So I think it's you want to create a baseline, right? And with patterns specifically, you just want to be like, here's how it should look, and go and detach it, and then change it however you want. And I think that's okay. Like, I think detachment is something that we shouldn't over-index on because we, as a design system, we were really rigid, so we didn't want detachments previously. And over the last 2 years, we've gone more and more flexible. So we kind of welcome detachments, right? Like, obviously, you shouldn't be detaching a button or those foundational components. But if it's something that's really complex that you need to break apart and do something, our design system should be flexible enough to actually handle that. right? So we actually kind of welcome detachments in some way, especially when things get more complex and it's harder to manage in Figma. We don't want to over-index on Figma management because it adds memory to the Figma, and also it may deviate away from how it's managed in code, which is a problem because when you want to change that pattern, the closer it is to code, the easier it is to communicate that change to an engineer. So the further it is away, the more sub parts that you've created, the harder it is to unpack what you've changed for an engineer to then interpret that. So it's really, really crucial you're chatting to your engineer as much as possible to understand how it's built and then refactoring that into your design. So it's easier for that, not V1, but that V1.1.
Can you explain the difference between background and surface? This comes up quite often, and no one's ever quite sure.
Yes, I don't know if I'm going to be able to explain that too well either, because if you want, I can ask the person that created them for an official definition. But from my understanding, it's elevation surfaces like the layers, right? If you remember material design, how that started, you're thinking of like the body, your background is like the sublayer, like the sunken or the base layer. And then when there's a modal or there's a card or anything, you're kind of thinking of it as a layer on top. And a surface layer is, you kind of want the base UI layer. That's the common layer that's going to be used on most of the surfaces. And then when you have things like modals or things like panels that come out, that is a different layer, right? Like it's coming in, it's over the top of the base content. And at the moment for us, it's the same color, it's white, but the shadows are different, right? So we want to separate that to show the user that this thing is on top of this UI. As you can imagine with our products, especially like Jira, there's a lot of interactions. So we really need to make sure that we show people where they are in space. If they're in a new experience, if it's come over, if they're still in the same screen, we need to give them control and give them understanding of where they are. So that's where surface comes in. The problem is obviously the mental model designers don't necessarily think of that unless they've thought of that surface model. I think it's called the spatial layer or the spatial model. But backgrounds are backgrounds, right? They're usually for something that's not necessarily surface, more interactive components, right? Maybe a colored background or a button background, particularly, maybe an icon background. It's generally not all, it's on a surface, but it's not the defined surface. So that's where backgrounds are kind of more semantic and more colorful traditionally than your kind of like neutral UI surface layers.
That
Does that
answers
resonate
it,
with
I
everyone?
think. Yeah, well, for
Okay.
me at least. I see a few nods.
Yeah.
All right, we have a follow-up hypothetical. Okay, let's say I have an accordion component placed on top of a default surface. Both are meant to appear as white. And Atlassian, with the fill color for the accordion, use a surface color, a background color, or have no color applied.
Yes, so it really depends. In my mind, I would just do them both as surface. So the background, the base layer is surface, and the accordion is surface. Now, if the accordion was colored, you could probably use a background token, but it's not a raised surface, right? Like a card, we use raised because we would have a shadow, right? We want to pull it out from the UI, especially if the card is interactive. But from an accordion, it still feels like it's that base flat layer, right? Yes, it's interactive, but it still feels like it's part of the page. We don't want it to come out of the page. So I always like to fill the layers, even though the accordion is the same as the background. And that's because the accordion may be used on a different color background in the future, right? And you want to make things scalable. So it's always good to apply backgrounds so you can control the accessibility of that component and make sure it's always that color, unless you wanted it to be transparent and reactive to the content underneath. But that's a big accessibility problem because someone could put it on whatever they want and then you're not going to be able to read the text. So you want to make sure that that surface is controlled and it's self-contained. So surface on top of surface, I would say. But if we had a
Okay.
background white, maybe I'd use background white.
Okay. I I thought you were gonna say transparent maybe, but I think that's a good explanation that if you replaced it on a crazy background, then it'd be hard to see.
Yes, and unless you knew the accordion was only going to be used on the surface, then yeah, we have like transparent tokens that have hover included, and you have that interaction baked in. But our surface tokens have hovered and pressed, so yeah, you achieve that same look and feel, but it's in a controlled environment for accessibility.
How are your variables structured for typography? Do you have a primitive and a semantic collection for variables for text?
Yeah, so we have what we call the text primitive, and we have a heading component, basically. I didn't Full disclosure, I didn't work on typography, so I'll just maybe butcher what the work everyone else has done on. So we have a combination of variables and styles, right? So we have variables, which are the underlying what we call base tokens of typography. So that is the system of type. So you can see we've got the font families, we have two modes, we have legacy and we have modernizers inter. And then we have all of our weights, what we call our base tokens. And then this is where the semantics is for the headings. So you have all the t-shirt sizes and you have all the base tokens here. But the way we actually surface these to our designers, or who we call our makers, is we surface them as styles. Because with variables, you have to pick the variable in each. Let's say I'm typing something. If it wasn't a style, I'd have to assign a variable to each one of these attributes or these properties. And that's a huge learning curve for our designers. So all we do is provide them a style that encompasses behind the scenes all the variables. And we find that's a really nice experience. So all they have to do is think about is what t-shirt size they're using. And under the hood, as you can see, all the variables are connected. So it's systemized. And if for some reason they wanted to, in that 5% we allow, to create something custom, and they need to say maybe user generated content or something, they can then just use our base tokens, our base variables under the hood.
How specifically are you helping, or is that team helping to educate the designers about how to use the design system, recognize what's, right or good?
Yeah, so tooling, education, advocacy is actually, I guess, my specialty and my passion. I really enjoy taking something that's defined and then really building confidence with our designers. And I think with education, I found that confidence is probably the word. A lot of people, they want to do the right thing and they want to use the system in the right way, but they just don't have confidence in knowing how to even use it. So the way we do education is we'll kind of do like we'll release something in our comms of like, here's the system, but we'll do like behind the screens or something where we kind of show you how we made it. We'll then usually do some Loom videos or course material around how to actually use the thing. We'll try and be as explicit as possible, which is like literally, this is how you go from this to this in Figma. That's really important, but we'll use our network as well. So we're really trying to build a champions program at the moment where we're trying to build design system experts outside of our team. So then when we have a new concept, we just teach them and then they teach others, right? We want to teach one person who can teach three or four. So we're really trying to focus on that network effect, because what we're finding at our size is that even if we release something like a comms, not everyone's going to see it. Slack fatigue is real, right? If we post something in our own special design system announcements channel, 100 people are going to see it. What about the other 400 or 500 people? It's not their fault that they don't see it. So we've realized that just the spray and pray, just a blast, is not going to work, right? We need to actually be a lot smarter with it. And we realized that champions programs, we do these things like showcases as well, and dojos where we go, we're going to showcase you a bunch of new ADS or Atlassian Design System concepts. It's an hour-long presentation. It takes a lot of work for us, but it's a deeper dive into our new offerings and how to use them. And we do one for the US and Sydney time zone and one for India and Europe time zone. And we try and do more and more of those. So yeah, the way we try and kind of educate and advocate people is this kind of self-serve or hands-on process that involves a lot of work for us, but we think it's very crucial. Makers or our designers really want one-on-one time, or they want more specialized and dedicated learning. Similar to your boot camps, right? It's that, but within our organization, because it makes them feel confident and it gives them a sounding board rather than just read a blog and then figure it out. So yeah, when you're thinking about adoption and education, try and do stuff that doesn't scale, because you're probably going to get stuff with the best results. So we have office hours as well. So we do office hours where we do specialized office hours. So if you're learning Figma libraries, or you want to adopt, or you have accessibility questions or general design system questions, you can book a slot with any of us for 20 minutes. We don't ask any questions in terms of, we don't do any kind of pre-validation. Whatever you need, we'll try and unblock you. And obviously that's not a really scalable thing. We found that's really beneficial when people just need to be unblocked.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love the presentations and the office hours.
Well, I found, maybe Alex, you at PayPal or anyone here, it's usually the things that they don't give roadmap time for. They go, yep, sweet, icons are done, type's done, foundation's done, on to the next thing. Go, whoa, whoa, I need a feedback loop, right? I need to push this out there and then listen to see how people are using it and then iterate. But even we can be guilty of it, right? Like we're just like, yeah, next thing. We're like, we need to bake this in because otherwise you're just going to realize 6 months, 18 months later that these things aren't gelling together or people aren't using them how you expect. So I find that the business doesn't really understand advocacy yet, and they don't fight for it in the roadmap.
What do you use to track design system adoption and time saved?
Oh, okay, this is interesting. So I use the kind of coding lens of my ability, and we kind of built a custom adoption dashboard, basically. So the benefit of being at Atlassian, we have all these kind of tools available to us. So we built this dashboard. Let me see if I can show you one of them. But basically, it scans a Figma file. It scans our Figma organization. Okay, I'll show you last financial years because this is old data. So this essentially is a custom dashboard using one of our products called Atlassian Analytics. That's not a plug, by the way. It was just available to us. And what we do is we track adoption of this last financial year was tracking adoption of Figma libraries. So what we do is we use the Figma's REST API. Every day we pull in the files that we provide it, and it scans every layer. So it looks for every color, every spacing variable, every type, every icon. And it goes, what percentage of those are using our design system, right? And then we get that true percentage in Figma, and then we track that over time. So this has been really beneficial for us to build a view that we've never had before, because we find like usage, the analytics that Figma gives us isn't what we need. We don't really, I don't care how many times something's been used. I want to know in this file that's been marked as ready for dev, like how much is ADS, right? How much is our design system? Because that's going to end up to our customers. So we found this is really beneficial. If you don't have the resource available to you, I think Omelette is meant to be really good. Omelette.dev that kind of offers that. You might need an engineer to plug it in, but that's kind of a very similar capability. But I think it's really important for an organization because you need to know where you're going and you need to know what that quality bar is. For us, it's 95% adoption because we believe our system is mature enough where we can push for a high percentage, also in code as well. But that percentage may be different in adoption for others. But I think it's really important to build a view of out of everything in this file that a developer is going to build, what percentage is the design system? Because if it's low, it's going to be really interesting and it's going to be some interesting conversations about why it's low. And then that gives really good insight into maybe something's missing or there's a communication issue or confidence issue. And then it gives you a really clear understanding of how to resolve things. So that's how we track adoption. We found it really successful. It's our second year of doing it. It's something I've pushed for quite severely. And it's really changing the culture of the organization where we're focusing on this. So what actually we're going to be doing now is we're talking to all our heads of designs and making it one of their personal goals to have this 95% ADS adoption for all foundations in every file marked as ready for dev by the end of financial year. So any file that's got a spec that's ready for dev, we want that to be 95% adoption, and we want all the heads of designs to agree on that. So we feel confident in pushing that, and we've got the support from the business to do so.